Do you remember the moment you found out Pluto was no longer a planet? Maybe you were in school, looking at a solar system poster that had always included Pluto as the ninth planet. Then one day, out of nowhere, scientists declared that Pluto wasn't a planet anymore. Just like that, it was kicked out of the club. For decades, Pluto had been the odd little underdog of our solar system, a tiny frozen world at the edge of space that people couldn't help but love. And then, in 2006, everything changed. But why? What exactly happened? And more importantly, was it fair? In August 2006, a group of astronomers from the International Astronomical Union, or IAU, met in Prague to settle a long-standing debate. What does it actually mean to be a planet? For centuries, the definition had been pretty vague. In ancient hypothetical times, people simply called the bright moving dots in the sky planets. As science advanced, we learned more about the solar system, but the word planet was never officially defined. By the early 2000s, astronomers started discovering other icy bodies in the Kuiper Belt, some of which were nearly the same size as Pluto. If Pluto was a planet, did that mean these new objects should be planets too? Instead of adding more planets to the list, the IAU decided it was time to set clear rules. They came up with 3 simple requirements for something to be considered a planet. First, it has to orbit the Sun. Pluto passed that test. Second, it has to be large enough for gravity to shape it into a nearly round sphere. Pluto passed that one too. But then came the third rule, the one that changed everything. A planet must have cleared its orbit, meaning it must be the dominant object in its path around the Sun. Pluto, unfortunately, shares its neighborhood with countless other icy bodies in the Kuiper Belt. Unlike the other planets, it hasn't cleared its orbit. And just like that, Pluto was out. Instead of being a planet, it was reclassified as a dwarf planet. The backlash was immediate. People were shocked. Scientists, teachers, and space enthusiasts around the world couldn't believe it. Schools had to update textbooks. Teachers struggled to explain to their students why their favorite little planet had been taken away. NASA's New Horizons spacecraft was already on its way to Pluto, and suddenly, its destination wasn't even considered a real planet anymore. It was like training for the Olympics, only to be told halfway through that your sport didn't count. But was this really fair? Pluto had been a planet for 76 years. It has an atmosphere, weather patterns, and 5 moons. It even has a massive heart-shaped glacier on its surface. Doesn't that count for something? Some scientists believe the decision to demote Pluto was rushed. Even NASA's chief scientist, Alan Stern, argued that the clearing its orbit rule doesn't make sense. After all, Earth still has asteroids crossing its path. Does that mean Earth isn't a planet either? So what if we fought back? What if Pluto was reinstated as a planet? Would it change how we see our solar system? And if Pluto gets back in, should we add even more planets to the list? Hold on to that thought, because next we're exploring what the solar system would look like if Pluto had never been demoted in the first place. Imagine waking up one morning to breaking news. Pluto is officially a planet again. After years of controversy, scientists have reversed their decision. And just like that, the solar system has changed once more. Schools would scramble to update textbooks, teachers would have to rework their lessons, and space agencies like NASA would need to adjust how they classify planets in their missions. The solar system, which had been neatly organized with 8 planets for nearly 2 decades, would suddenly have a new, old addition. But here's the real question. If Pluto makes a comeback, would it open the door for even more planets? Pluto's demotion wasn't just about Pluto. When astronomers removed it from the planetary lineup, They also introduced the category of dwarf planets, which includes other distant worlds like Eris, Haumea, and Makemake. But if Pluto regains its planetary status, those worlds might demand recognition too. After all, Eris is nearly the same size as Pluto, and Haumea, though oddly shaped, has moons and even a thin ring system. If Pluto gets back in, why shouldn't they? That would mean our solar system wouldn't just return to 9 planets. It could suddenly have 12 or more. This change wouldn't just affect classroom posters and trivia questions. It would reshape how scientists think about planetary formation. Right now, researchers study planets and dwarf planets separately. But if Pluto is reinstated, they might need to rethink those divisions. Would astronomers have to rewrite planetary evolution models? Would they start considering even smaller worlds as potential planets? The more planets we recognize, the more complex our understanding of the solar system becomes. And what about space exploration? If Pluto is a planet again, would it mean more missions dedicated to exploring it and its neighbors? Right now, most space missions focus on the 8 major planets, but a new definition could shift priorities. Could NASA or other space agencies send more probes to the outer reaches of the solar system? Could we eventually see human missions planned for Pluto and beyond? The truth is, redefining Pluto wouldn't just be about Pluto. It could change everything. It could force us to rethink what it means to be a planet, shake up our solar system model, and even expand our vision of where planets begin and end. But if Pluto's return means rewriting the solar system, what does that mean for the future? Could we eventually recognize even more planets? And where would we draw the line? Stay tuned, because next we're diving into what happens when the definition of a planet keeps evolving. For years, people have dismissed Pluto as being too small to be a planet. But is that really fair? If size alone determined what counts as a planet, Mercury, our solar system's smallest planet, might also be in trouble. In reality, Pluto is far more complex and dynamic than its reputation suggests. In fact, it has some of the most fascinating features of any world in our solar system. So, what makes Pluto so special? And is it really that different from the planets we still recognize today? One of the biggest surprises about Pluto came in 2015, when NASA's New Horizons spacecraft flew by and sent back the first close-up images of its surface. Instead of a dull, frozen rock, Pluto revealed itself to be a world full of activity and striking landscapes. It has vast plains covered in nitrogen ice, towering mountains made entirely of frozen water, and even an enormous heart-shaped glacier called Sputnik Planitia that's larger than the state of Texas. That's right, Pluto literally has a heart, something no other planet can claim. But it gets even more interesting. Pluto has an atmosphere, just like Earth and Mars, though it's much thinner and composed mostly of nitrogen, methane, and carbon monoxide. The weirdest part? Pluto's atmosphere changes when it moves closer to the Sun in its long elliptical orbit. Its icy surface begins to evaporate, creating a thin, hazy sky. As Pluto drifts back into the cold depths of space, that atmosphere freezes and falls back to the ground as frost. This means Pluto experiences seasons, even though each season lasts for decades. And then there's the question of size. Pluto is about 2/3 the diameter of our Moon, which sounds small, but size alone has never been the deciding factor for planethood. Mercury, for example, is barely larger than Pluto and has almost no atmosphere at all. It's basically a dead rock scorched by the sun, yet no one questions whether Mercury is a planet. Meanwhile, Pluto has active geology, weather, and even glaciers that slowly shift over time. If Mercury deserves its planetary status, why should Pluto be treated any differently? The more we learn about Pluto, the harder it is to argue that it doesn't belong among the planets. It has an atmosphere, complex terrain, seasonal changes, and even moons. 5 of them, including Charon, which is so large that Pluto and Charon technically orbit each other like a binary system. With all of this going on, Pluto is far from just a lifeless ball of ice. So if Pluto isn't really that different from planets like Mercury, and if it has such incredible active features, why was it singled out? Was it just an unfortunate victim of classification rules? Or was there something deeper at play? If Pluto is a planet in every meaningful way, then maybe the real issue isn't Pluto itself. It's how we define planets in the first place. And if that definition keeps changing, what other surprises might be waiting for us in the outer reaches of our solar system? Even after nearly 2 decades, the debate over Pluto's status refuses to die. Scientists may have officially reclassified it as a dwarf planet, but to the public, Pluto never stopped being the 9th planet of our solar system. People have a deep emotional connection to Pluto. It's the underdog, the little world at the edge of space that we all grew up with. And in an age where public opinion spreads faster than ever, could the overwhelming love for Pluto actually force scientists to reconsider their decision? Imagine if the IAU suddenly announced an open vote on Pluto's fate. Would the world rally behind Pluto's return? Social media would explode with hashtags like Char Pluto Isoplanet and Justice for Pluto, with people demanding that textbooks be rewritten. Once again, after all, we've seen internet campaigns change everything from entertainment decisions to corporate policies. Why not astronomy? If enough pressure mounted, could the IAU actually reverse its ruling? The problem is, scientists, don't just go by popular opinion. They rely on definitions, classifications, and years of research to determine what qualifies as a planet. But even among astronomers, there's still disagreement. Some argue that Pluto was unfairly demoted based on a single, controversial rule. This idea that a planet must clear its orbit. Others believe that the definition of a planet should be expanded to include Pluto and other similar worlds. In fact, some scientists have proposed a much simpler definition. If it's round and orbits a star, it's a planet. That would instantly bring Pluto back into the club, along with dozens of other celestial objects. So, what happens next? Will scientists ever agree on a definition that satisfies both the public and the scientific community? Or will Pluto remain in this strange limbo, beloved by the world but rejected by official classifications? Maybe it's time for a new approach. After all, shouldn't the people have a say in what counts as a planet? What do you think? Should Pluto make a comeback? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's settle this debate once and for all. If Pluto were reinstated as a planet, it wouldn't just change textbooks. It could change the entire direction of space exploration. Right now, most missions focus on Mars, the Moon, and the outer gas giants. But if Pluto officially returned to planetary status, it might spark new interest, new funding, and even a second wave of deep space exploration. After all, if Pluto is back in the planetary club, shouldn't we learn more about it? Could it hold secrets we've only begun to uncover? And what if Pluto's comeback led us to something even bigger? A hidden planet lurking beyond the edges of our solar system. When NASA's New Horizons spacecraft flew past Pluto in 2015, it revealed a world far more complex than scientists had expected. Instead of a dead, icy rock, Pluto turned out to have a dynamic landscape, a shifting atmosphere, and evidence of possible underground oceans. That flyby was just a glimpse. Imagine what we could discover if we sent another mission, this time with a lander, or even a long-term orbiter. A renewed interest in Pluto could push space agencies to send more advanced, probes, and who knows, maybe one day we'll even see a human mission to Pluto. It sounds impossible now, but a century ago, people thought landing on the moon was a fantasy. If technology keeps advancing, a crewed mission to Pluto, even if it takes decades to get there, might not be so far-fetched, but Pluto itself isn't the only reason we should be paying attention. Pluto is part of the Kuiper Belt, a vast region of icy bodies beyond Neptune that we've barely begun to explore. Scientists believe this region holds clues about the early solar system and possibly even the origins of life. If we invest in Pluto, we're also investing in uncovering new worlds, some of which might be even larger or stranger than Pluto itself. In fact, some astronomers believe there could be a hidden ninth planet, sometimes called Planet X, lurking deep in the Kuiper Belt. We haven't found it yet, but Pluto might be the key to getting closer. Could studying Pluto's orbit and its surroundings lead us to discovering an entirely new planet? A Pluto comeback wouldn't just be about nostalgia. It could kickstart a whole new era of space exploration. More funding, more missions, and perhaps even the discovery of a hidden planet waiting for us beyond the edges of our solar system. The question is, are we ready to go that far? And if Pluto isn't the last planet we bring back, what else could be out there, waiting for us to find? What if Pluto had never been demoted? Imagine a timeline where the International Astronomical Union never changed the definition of a planet in 2006. In this reality, Pluto would have remained the ninth planet, and our solar system might look very different. Not in a physical sense, but in how we think about it. Would Pluto still be the beloved underdog, or would it have faded into the background as just another planet in a growing list? And if Pluto had always been a planet, would we have already classified even more planets by now? For starters, textbooks and classroom lessons would have never needed a rewrite. Kids would still be memorizing all 9 planets instead of 8, and Pluto's place in the lineup would have remained secure. But the real change would have been in planetary science. If Pluto had kept its planetary status, astronomers might have been more open to considering other large Kuiper Belt objects, like Eris, Haumea, and Makemake, as planets too. Instead of shrinking the list, we might have expanded it. Maybe by now, we wouldn't be talking about just 9 planets. We could have a solar system with 12 or more. Another possibility is that Pluto wouldn't be as famous as it is today. Part of Pluto's popularity comes from the fact that it was taken away. The debate, the controversy, the social media campaigns, it all turned Pluto into something of a cultural icon. But if Pluto had always been a planet, would people still care as much? Would NASA have still prioritized the New Horizons mission, which gave us those incredible close-up images in 2015? Or would Pluto have remained a distant world, largely ignored in favor of bigger planets like Jupiter and Saturn? This alternative reality raises an interesting question. Did Pluto's demotion actually help it in the long run? By being kicked out, Pluto gained worldwide attention, sparked debate, and even pushed scientists to rethink what it really means to be a planet. So maybe, just maybe, Pluto's fall from grace wasn't the end of its story. It was just the beginning. But if Pluto's comeback is still possible, what happens next? Could we really live in a future where Pluto returns as a planet? Or is this debate destined to go on forever? So after all this debate, where does Pluto really stand? Should it be reinstated as the 9th planet? Or is it better off as a dwarf planet? Scientists remain divided, and the public is as passionate as ever. But before we reach a final verdict, let's break down the strongest arguments on both sides. On one hand, Pluto has everything we typically associate with a planet. It's round, has an atmosphere, experiences seasons, and even has a complex system of moons. It's more geologically active than Mercury, which is still considered a planet, and it even has glaciers and mountains made of ice. Many scientists argue that the IAU's definition of a planet, specifically the rule about clearing its orbit, is flawed. Earth and Jupiter still have small asteroids crossing their paths, so by that standard, they wouldn't be planets either. If we simply define a planet as a celestial body that is round and orbits the Sun, Pluto would unquestionably belong in the planetary club. On the other hand, the argument against Pluto's return is based on practicality. If Pluto is reinstated, then other dwarf planets like Eris, Haumea, and Makemake would likely qualify as well. That could expand our solar system from 8 planets to 12, or even more. Some astronomers believe this would make the classification system too messy and difficult to teach. They argue that the current system works because it separates major planets from smaller, Pluto-like objects. From a scientific standpoint, Pluto is still an incredibly interesting world, even if it's not officially a planet. So, could Pluto ever make a comeback? It's entirely possible. Definitions in science change all the time as we learn more about the universe. Some astronomers have already proposed a new classification system that would include Pluto and similar objects as full-fledged planets. If public support remains strong and more scientific discoveries challenge the IAU's rules, there's a real chance that Pluto could be reinstated in the future. But what do you think? Should we fight for Pluto's return? Or is it time to accept its status as a dwarf planet? Let us know in the comments, because in the end, this debate might not be over yet.